And a happy Jobs Day to you. Thank you very much for joining us on the Modern Job Search Checklist. We're streaming live to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. If you're in any of those destinations, feel free to say hi to us in the chat. We're willing to uh, notice you and give you a shout out during the show at some particular point. Welcome. And today's show, we're talking about what career traditions to leave behind in 2021. And if you've been watching my timeline on Twitter, you'll kind of catch a drift of what we'll kind of discuss a little bit today. Of course, you know me. My name is Mark, and you can always follow me at my usual stuff. If you're on LinkedIn, you can just follow my LinkedIn profile. Damian Birkel, my co-host every week, every Friday at 1 p.m. How are you, sir?
I am fine. Thank
Good
you.
deal. Good
Really,
deal.
yep.
And not only is Jobs Day, it's also Chelsea J's Day. She is joining us, and thank you very much, Chelsea, joining us. She's a career coach, and she has a very funny a couple of TikTok videos I've seen of her, or they might be reels. Sometimes I
Reels,
get yes,
yes.
I get the lines blurred sometimes, but very enjoyable. And she also has a podcast called Chelsea's Career Corner. How are you, Chelsea?
I'm wonderful. Thank you both so much for having me on today.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. It is a dangerous task, but we had to ask somebody to do it. Uh, do- don't forget to say hi to us in the chat, you guys. Let us know that you're there. We're willing to stop what we're doing to talk about what you need to do for your job search. We love the fact that you're coming,
Mhm.
spend your time, and a lot of you spend your time after the show. So we're going to keep that in mind. And you can still put comments in the chat box even when we're off the air for the replay. So we can catch those and you can tag us very easily that way, particularly on LinkedIn. The other channels are kind of hard to do the interactive as much, though you could do that on Facebook. I'll be able to see that during the show and after the show because it comes on my personal page. In the meantime, let's run through real quick what the jobs report is today because that has a lot to do with what we're talking about now. According to the BLS, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, it says U.S. economy added 194 jobs and 194,000 jobs in September, resulting in unemployment rate declining to 4.8. There are around 3 million fewer people in the labor force now compared to February 2020. Of course, that report always seems to leave behind approximate people who did not find jobs over the past year or since the pandemic, and there's still millions who still haven't found those jobs. And of course, too, there's the bunch that it may or may not include those who lost benefits earlier in September. September 6th was the date where that was the cutoff, and people lost all those unemployment benefits. So I think just as a bonus round before we start the real gig is your advice, and we'll start with you, Chelsea, and I'm putting you on the spot because we didn't do this
Okay.
pregame. But the number one tip right now for those who have been unemployed for a long period of time.
Oh, the number one tip is really get to know yourself, who you are, what you have to offer, and what you want. Because now is the time to really, do that self reflection and be a little bit more pickier about who you're dedicating your time and energy to. That's what I
Mm.
recommend.
Okay. All right. Damien.
And building on that, once you get a feel for who you are and where you want to go to next, be conscious of the need to approach your job search from a horizontal angle. And what I
Mm.
mean by that is
Mhm.
you need to be consistent in how you present yourself across the internet, LinkedIn, Facebook, Indeed.com, your resume, all of those different things need to be telling the same story because if they aren't, uh, you might end up like one of my candidates where there was a perfect job that he did not get. And I followed up and I knew the head of the firm and called and they said, oh, no, no, we wouldn't touch him because he looked like he was
Mm,
schizophrenic. On his resume, he
Wow.
looked like a conquering hero. On his LinkedIn page, he looked like a dunce. Excuse me, that's rather terse.
Hmm.
But that was because we hadn't had a chance to match his LinkedIn profile to his new
mm,
resume. And so if you're out there job searching, if you are not telling the same results driven story, then when people go to find you, they're going to get a puzzling view of you. So get to know yourself and then produce documents and
mhm,
pages that are the consistent professional you and where you want to go next.
That's a very interesting conversation. I want
mm.
to be able to park there because there are a lot of people like that who are telling inconsistent stories throughout their whole social profiles. And then the resume tells this other story. Many times it doesn't even speak to what it says on LinkedIn. And Chelsea, I know you work with a lot of clients who or have that conundrum. Uh,
Yes.
and you could probably even expand on what Damien said even further.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that consistency and branding across all platforms is so important. But when people come to me, something that I quickly realize is that unfortunately, LinkedIn and other online profiles are always an afterthought. When people come to me, the first thing they say is, oh, I need to update my resume. And oh, I have 15 different versions of my resume. And I'm always like, hold on. Why are there 15 different versions? How many
Mhm.
positions are you applying to? And they're like, oh, well, I tweak it, depending on the job. And the truth is, you shouldn't have to tweak a resume if you have a clear direction of the type of roles that you're going to apply for. You shouldn't be applying for 5 different roles because if you are, then there is no focus and you can't be consistent in anything really. So I
Mhm.
do always encourage people to, number one, don't just let your LinkedIn profile sit there and never update it or change things. Make sure you're logging into that social profile. Number two, you need to know what's out there when it comes to the internet on you. So I always recommend that people Google themselves at least
Mhm.
every quarter. And I always recommend setting up those Google alerts so you know what employers are finding and hiring managers are finding when they type your name into Google. And you better make sure it's consistent.
Yeah, and it's quite a shift. And I think I've talked about it before. How back in 2009, 2010, um, probably is a very long time for a lot of people who are watching us. Uh, back at that time, the afterthought was, well, let's just make sure this person. We check social profiles just to make sure this person
Mhm.
isn't being irresponsible with their lives by looking at Facebook pictures, by looking at their LinkedIn, make sure they're not lying from their LinkedIn to their resume and what have you. Now that's kind of the first rule of engagement is the social profile to see what stories are going to intrigue the employer, and the employer is not intrigued, or if they see the inconsistency that Damien that you've pointed out, then they become alerted differently as to not seeing you being qualified, but seeing you more as confused.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think one of the things that people need to just take away from is to understand the importance of their LinkedIn profile and how big a part it really plays in the hiring, because that is the spot to either make sure to either include you or exclude you, and that seems to be also the deal breaker as well. And this particular case, your client has said that you were saying that the resume and the LinkedIn is inconsistent, so it brought up a red flag. Now, that's not to say that the client was lying. I think that could be interpreted as that, but that's not. I don't think that's particularly the case. It's just two drastically different stories. One was complete, and the other one was not complete.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that people may not realize is your LinkedIn profile will take you places that your resume will never take you. And what I
Hmm.
mean by that is the more immersed you become in building your curated LinkedIn
Mhm.
community, the greater the likelihood is that complete strangers that you have never met will find you, and recruiters will find you, and
Hmm.
positions will come to you just because of the way that you have built your LinkedIn profile. That's the first step. But the
Hmm.
other thing is you need to have a vibrant LinkedIn profile. And that vibrancy comes from being on LinkedIn, I always say, at least once a day. And even more importantly, is being active and participating, joining groups, making comments, writing articles, all of the things that when a person hits your profile will say, very impressive. And that
Hmm.
goes for whether you are working or not working, because LinkedIn is the arc, if you will. It's the halo effect that goes around you that projects outward the professional you that you are now, and even more important, the professional you that you are becoming.
Mhm. Yep, and it goes a lot back to what you were saying, Chelsea, about
Mhm.
being. I don't want to throw the Maslow term out there, being
Mhm.
self-actualized, but
Mhm.
I think there
Mhm.
needs to be this self-awareness where if it's not clear on your documents, it's not going to be clear to anybody else. Correct?
Absolutely. And I do want to build off of a few things that Damien just said. And I love how you talked about being active on LinkedIn. I also advise that job seekers are intentional with their use of LinkedIn.
Mhm.
And I also try to remind everyone who comes to me that you need to be mindful of what you are putting out on the internet as you are building your brand on LinkedIn. So
Mhm.
think about what you're commenting on, think about what you're posting, the things that you are saying, because that will live on forever on the
Mhm.
internet. So whatever you decide to type in that box, make sure you can back it up in case an employer or a recruiter ever questions you about it.
Yeah, and that's good. And don't forget, there's also this application called Screenshot, where if you do decide to take it down, someone has already
Mhm.
screenshot what you said, because a lot of times you get one shot at
Yes.
it and you blow that shot, that screenshot, that person will have control over you and your reputation. And you need to consider what could actually happen. So let's jump on to
Yes.
our original topics.
Mhm.
Again, we're talking about the career traditions you leave behind, and one of the things is don't ignore your resume and your LinkedIn profile if you want to
Mhm.
add tips to this. But I think the other one is we had quite a robust discussion in our chat this week about job search sin, and really, you know, we could get into some really big arguments about it. I think we were all on one accord here, but I know I've been in scenarios where people will say, well, there isn't a right or wrong. No, but there is a misinterpretation. And that's
Mhm.
all that can derail your career as much as a sin. But I'm going to start with you, Damien. You came up with quite an exhaustive list, and not that we need to go through the list, but I think one of the things that you probably may have seen lately that might be a job search sin, which probably might fit more people than just one in your view.
Sure. And again, going with uh, clarity in terms of what you are projecting on the internet before you can do that. And it is really the single most important step. And that
Mhm.
is to have a career summary, not an objective. A company, a human resource manager, they don't care what your objective is. They want
Mhm.
to be able to read 4 or 5 sentences and decide in that moment whether or not they're going to go forward with your resume. It's important there. It's important because it is the bedrock of your job campaign. It is important because it is becomes a variation of your 30-second commercial. And probably going back to what Chelsea was saying, um, if you can't tell me where you want to go next, I can't help you. And
Mhm.
again, going through the clarity, that clarity in your career summary leads out from there and impacts every single document and almost
Yes.
everything that you say as you go through the job search process. It all begins with a career summary, which, and I'll define, is 4, maybe 5 sentences that is a combination of the best of your past,
Mhm.
things that you have done well, and where you want to go next. So, in fact, it is a future forward series of sentences that form a statement and create an impression and let people know where you want to go to next. And it's your North Star because if you know your career summary, then you know where you're going to go next. And if you don't have a career summary, please, please stop what you're doing and get one.
Yep. And I'm sure Chelsea can even go on as she has one of those resume credentials for writing resumes on and she brings with her experience. Uh, the summary very often is discarded or
Right.
it's often um, it's not appreciated as much as people think of it, and they are willing to spend the least amount of time on that and try to go and fix their experience section, which sometimes isn't articulated really well either. Isn't that right, Chelsea?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing about the summary, you have to think about it this way and why the objective statement is so far gone. Number one, it's about you, but it's not really about you when it comes to the employer. For a
Hmm.
minute, you have to step outside of yourself and think about what the employer wants and what they need. Because your summary that you're putting on there is what is going to set you up for success. I always say that it's a professional promise to your future employer. You let them know this is what I've done in the past. I'm good at this, like I'm the bomb.com at it. And
Hmm.
these are the results that I can do for you. And once they say, whoa, this person was able to boost revenue, by $50,000 in only a few weeks, I know they'll turn around and do that here. Or this person was able to identify a gap in this process and they were able to save their organization a bunch of money, they'll do that here too. And having that summary is what is going to captivate them right away and make them want to read on and on. And
Yeah.
you're right. So many people don't think about that section because it is one of the harder sections because you actually have to think about what it is that you offer. And most people don't think about, what makes them unique or the values that they bring to the table.
Mhm.
And the trouble in that is if you can't tell me what makes you different, you're you're just like everybody else. I could hire somebody else off the street. So it doesn't
Yeah.
make you stand out. So that summary section is so important.
Yeah.
Followed by backup.
Followed by backup, which probably brings me to what you have as a sin in job search.
Hmm. Yeah. So there was a few when it comes to that, but it
Hmm.
really comes back to that clarity, keeping track of what you've done in the past. That's a big one that I notice with clients that come my way. Not
Mm.
tracking your progress, not tracking your successes and achievements. Because when people come to me, the first thing I ask them is, okay, what have you done? What are you most proud of? And people just go through that day to day, work, and they don't stop to actually appreciate, oh, wow, this is what I did. It was a big deal. Or they turn around and tell me, Chelsea, I've been in this position for so long. I can't remember what I did, 5 or 10 years ago. So one of the bigger sins is not keeping good documentation of the things that you've done. Because when
Mhm.
you're ready to move on and you make that promise statement, you're going to have to back it up when it comes to that description section to let them
Mhm.
know I did this in this role and so on.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's about proof and
Mhm.
demonstration, or when it comes
Mhm.
down to it now, because everybody says they can do a great job. Everybody says that they
Right.
were excellent at XYZ. Are you prepared to prove it? Is going to be the question. And I think as we talk about this, and this is probably a topic for other shows in the in the future,
Yeah.
that you've got that employers are now looking to prove your skills, and by taking
Mhm.
aptitude tests and by taking
Yes.
certain types of behavioral tests,
Mhm.
and they want you to be able to articulate the value of what you do and how it will contribute to that company. Damien, you as a hiring manager, as a former hiring manager,
Mhm.
those are the attributes that are very important to you, that this person, not only anybody can claim anything,
Right.
but you're also asking questions to show that they have that they're adept at being able to learn the job through what they've done in the past.
Absolutely. And uh, to kind of make that graphic to those that are watching, um, I always look upon every bullet point on your resume as a challenge statement.
Mm,
If you say that you increase sales by 50% in 6 months, that's a challenge statement. And that's what you want.
Mhm.
You want them to bring you in and ask you, how did you do it? And the beauty of this is, with every bullet point having a quantifiable, measurable benefit, those that read your resume, those that interview you, I can almost guarantee that different things will impress different people.
mhm,
And what you're going for here is, when you think about it as a challenge statement, what it really is that it's an opportunity for you to tell a story. And when you tell a story, you cross that intangible line of talking about what you did to a person going, now I know how he did it or she did it. Now I'm
Mhm.
beginning to see how they think. Now I'm beginning to see how they might fit. So storytelling, when you're doing interviewing, is much less stressful. It's a more robust way to interview. You're much more comfortable. And although you will end up working much harder on the front end with your career summary and the quantifiable, measurable benefits, in the long term, what happens is, when a person, and this has happened to me hundreds of times, will get done and they'll look at it and they'll go, wow, I did all that. Not only that, I can tell you how I did all that. And I feel really good about myself.
mhm,
And so, going
Mhm.
back to your question, yes, when I was interviewing people, I would ask them to prove it.
Mhm.
How did you do this? And if there weren't numbers, how much, when, um, how long did it take you? And then every now and again, with a twinkle in my eye, and I'm dating myself here, but I would say something like, "Tell me, how many ping pong balls fit into a 747?" And after that look of alarm crossed their face and all the color drained out of their uh, face, um, and they were completely pale and sweating, I would just wait to see how they answered, because there was no right answer. But what that did is that put the candidate on the spot, because I was looking for how quickly they could think on their feet. So that's a long answer to a short question.
And you brought up something that very often I think that is kind of one of the dirty secrets in interviewing candidates, which I think is also a sin, is that they're not clear, because they're not clear. Going back to what Chelsea said, they're not clear on their direction wholly. It's hard to articulate your value in a very clear manner, and therefore the interviewer has to spend time to evaluate whether you can communicate well
Mhm.
enough to communicate with the rest of the team or not. And that's kind of the thing that really throws a lot of people off. And really, after they go through that exercise, they don't care what you can do, but if you can't articulate and be clear in your communication, Chelsea, it looks it's
Mhm.
pretty much a done deal, and your interview's often cut short and is done.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I do with my clients after I put together their resume is we do a little mock interview session, because I want you to be able to answer these questions with confidence. And I also don't want you rambling, because what I
Mhm.
do notice is when you turn around and say, okay, how did you achieve this? And then they go on and on and on. And then 3 minutes later, you're like, whoa, we're still on question number one. I need you to break it down to the point where it's easily understandable for anybody that approaches you.
Mhm.
And I tell professionals all the time, explain how you did something like you're talking to a middle schooler or a high schooler, because you
Mhm.
want anybody to be able to understand it. Because a lot of professionals think they say a whole bunch of keywords or jargon that a lot of people know, or that but it's very easy if you're rambling as well. So be able to explain how you did it in 60 seconds or less and make sure it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, part of that I think it got broken up a little bit because I guess of Wi-Fi, no telling. But I
Mhm.
think ultimately is you're saying that if you can't explain it as simply, then you've lost whoever's listening to you. So
Right.
I really appreciate that, and I think one of the sins is the communication aspect overall, and I think even we can even extend that discussion to the cover letter, when the cover letter and the resume doesn't communicate the same. It doesn't have to say the same thing. It should
Right.
tell. It should be chapter one and chapter two to the complete story, not necessarily. Do I have that right, Damien?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And what the cover letter allows you to do is align your abilities with the needs of the position. And that does two things. The first thing is it shows the hiring manager that you're pre-qualified, if you will. And I'm assuming you're going to hit 80 to 90% of the requirements. The
Mhm.
second thing is when they read your cover letter, they don't have to guess. They don't have to hunt and peck. They don't
Mhm.
have to read your
Mhm.
resume ad infinitum to find out if you have it. And then the third thing is, everybody says there's got to be a magic list of keywords somewhere. No, it changes for every position. Those
Mhm.
keywords are the position requirements. And so when you say your requirements, my abilities, and you match that word for word, guess what? You've just used keywords twice. And so when it goes through the applicant tracking system, it drives the applicant tracking system bananas because of the fact that you have hit all of the keywords or most of the keywords. And going back to what Chelsea said about 15 different versions of your resume, you don't have to do that. I mean, sure, go ahead and make minor revisions, but spend your time customizing your
Mhm.
presentation, if you will, through a very effective cover letter.
Yeah, personally, I hope the resume and the cover letter crumple up and dry up and go away. I mean, that's, I mean, nothing to my resume colleagues that are watching out there, who worked very hard for many years, who work with hundreds of people and thousands of people. I'm not saying that, but I think there's always seems to be this life crossroads with people and resumes. I wish it was more like TikTok. I really do, where people can do some stuff for 30 seconds in a minute and show themselves qualified. But we're not in that particular world because it's easier for recruiters and employers to filter through. And we could talk about what the challenges are and all that kind of thing. The main thing I want to get people to listen to is, and we don't talk about resumes in depth on this show very often. We will in the future. But all that to say is that for many times, it's that initial communication with an employer. It is the challenge of for most people to get that first landing of being able to get that first call from an employer. And if your initial stuff isn't available at this particular time, you won't get that call. And I see Annette Richmond, thanks for contributing the little devil face there, but you get my point. She knows my heart. But it's I think it is very challenging for people to come across. Let's go around again. Another job search sin. Damien, and you had a few, and I'm only asking for one more here. So keep, so keep that in mind. We got a show to do.
Yeah. Okay. Another real bugaboo is mentioning your salary. The minute you do that, you end any type of negotiation because you've just told them what you make.
Hmm.
That is the maximum they will ever offer you. And again, negotiation would be a completely different show, which we'll do.
Yeah.
But even if you are forced with your back up against the wall, there are still strategies that you can use, that being throwing out a range. But I can tell you from experience, because I've been out of work a lot, um, that when you interview, um, never, ever, ever mention salary during your first interview. Push it to the second interview, and sometimes you can even push it to the third. And one final thing, because I don't want to go off on a rant. Another reason why you don't want to reveal your salary is really important. If you reveal your salary and it's too low, then the people you're going to interview with are going to go, I guess he's a little bit lower than we thought in terms of our expectations. If you come up too high, they're going to say, he feels pretty good about himself, but he's not for us. He's already out of our price range. So we'll circle the wagon and come back to salary negotiation when there's a class I do at Professionals in Transition. It's called the Damien Salary Dance, but we'll save that for a future show. So
Yeah.
back to you, Mark.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I have some content out there with salary negotiation. I completely agree. That's probably one of the tougher things for a lot of people because in their industry, that is the first question they're asked. Even before they get to an interview, that initial phone screening with the HR assistant, no less, asking, what are your salary expectations? That's a different question than what's your current salary. You should not answer and say, well, that's kind of Honestly, that's a confidential question that I can't answer at this particular time. And if somebody is insisted for you to answer that question, I say it's time to move on. It is time to move on because they're not trusting the fact that you're trying to respect somebody else's wishes, especially if
Mhm.
they are, or it doesn't even matter whether it was by the employer or not. They need to respect that particular space. um, Chelsea, what job search sin, and you can feel free to also comment on what Damien just said, that people should stay away from.
Okay, well, I'm gonna do both. I'm gonna talk
Okay,
about what
that's
Damien
cool.
said and then bring up my job search sin as well.
Hmm.
I completely agree with both of you when it comes to salary, but there's a misconception out there with a lot of professionals who believe that they have to answer every single question that an employer asks them, because if they don't, they'll lose out on the position. And I've heard that from a lot of clients who have come my way. They're like, I can't say no, that's, confidential, or I can't refuse to answer it. I have to give them what they want. So the faster that professionals are able to realize that they have the ball in their court and they can drive that narrative and that conversation, the better off everyone else will be.
Mhm.
But as far as a job search sin, one of my biggest ones is not owning your career story. With the past year, so many people got laid off for, different reasons, or got into positions and realized, wow, this isn't a good fit. And they left after 3 months, 6 months. And I always hear people say, Chelsea, I don't know how to explain this. And employers are going to look down on me, if they see my resume and if they ask me this question. But the thing is, you need to take ownership of your career and be able to confidently and securely tell your story and be okay with it. And
Mhm.
some employers will embrace it, and there's a few who won't. And if they don't, they are not for you. But you need to be
Absolutely.
confident in the reasons why, you left an employer, or if you took some time off and have a gap in your resume, or you realized a certain career wasn't for you after a while. It is okay. Our minds change, life changes, and you
Mhm.
have to be okay with sharing that information, because the more confident you are, and when you can communicate your reasons for doing what you did and say it with a smile and some reassurance on their end, they're put at ease. But when you go into these interviews and you kind of cower down and you really don't have an answer and you're really nervous, it's going to make them second guess you. So own your career story, be confident in it, and know that it's okay that you made the decisions that you made.
Good, good. And one of the other things that I would add to that, people say, "Well, how did you spend your pandemic time?" And I
Mhm,
honestly say that I have learned more in a concentrated fashion than the entire time
mhm,
in my life. And so, building on what you were saying,
mhm,
Chelsea, if you have a gap, be sure to be able to talk about what you did during that
mhm,
gap. It may be a family, but did you take classes? Did you join a support group? Did you volunteer?
mhm.
Just things to show that,
Right.
and this is an old saying, but that you weren't sitting at home on the sofa drinking beer, watching soap operas. Uh,
Right.
uh, but again, showing that just because you weren't working for a company does not mean that you were not working. And being able to show that it really wasn't an interruption in service, it was something that needed to be done in OPS. You invested your time in getting
Mhm,
better rather than just letting it fly by as if you were not doing anything. So I am with you
mhm,
100%. I think that is an excellent point about having to manage your reputation
mhm,
and own your career story. So yeah, thank you, really good.
Yeah, I like just as going back to the salary issue. Annette says, thanks for saying that, Damien. they may think you're too inexperienced. Yes, please
Mhm.
do a show on salary negotiation. We're going to do that. I've got some folks in mind. As a matter if they're available or not, we'll have to see. But over time, we'll definitely get that, and we'll do a whole show on all things salary negotiation. One of the things that I think that too, just as um, so that people are thinking about differentiating themselves and to stand out. And I think that's one of the a sin that I had particularly in mind, that people don't look to stand out or look to ways to stand out. But for you to know that, you also have to know the company and what solutions you're bringing to them. To go into a company without knowing what their problems are, even before you get there, is a sin these days, because now there's so much information, so many ways to get information about a company, even if it was just about the company in general. But the bonus points, actually, the sweet spot is targeting the particular position and the team and the manager and what their problems are. You get more bonus, you make more headway to kind of build some of your discussion around there. So you have to bring in what you said, Chelsea, as far as your learning and the things that you need to bring, what you've been doing during the pandemic, Damien. You have to make that relevant to what their problems are if you really want to stay on track with those discussions during the interview. But I think another problem is that people don't present well in their interviews, period. They don't come with an actual presentation in mind. I'm not talking about one with a PowerPoint. I'm talking about one in presenting yourself as confident, presenting yourself as knowledgeable, presenting yourself as solution oriented. And as I say, you have to be the prescription to the employer's job description. You're there to bring the remedy. And you may not know the exact remedy at the time before or after the meeting, but you are bringing some sort, you're trying to discover how to deliver that. And I think when people start to bring that down to the science of keeping things compartmentalized and focused, then they're able to build a better presentation, and they can also decide whether that company is going to be the right fit for their skills, because you may not be the one, to solve that problem. If somebody has COVID, you don't automatically bring in a dentist because he has a doctor behind his name. You know what I mean? So you have to bring the right person. You have to bring the right remedy in order to do it. And neither does a painkiller solve every single problem you have with you. In fact, there's some painkillers that may not go with the other medication they may prescribe. But all that to say is that you have to be prescriptive and solution oriented. And I think that's where a lot of job seekers kind of fail in their presentation, is that they're not bringing anything that resonates to an employer. So, based on that, what are some redemption solutions that people should have the right mindset, uh, that they
Okay.
should be able to, that they're actually bringing redemption. We talked about sin. Now we got to talk about redemption, right? So to speak. Uh, what are some redeeming factors that are important, or just name one, Damien, that you could think of as we going forward?
The top interviewing tip that I have is focus on building rapport,
Mm,
especially during the first interview. And here's why. The philosophy is, if I like you, I may hire you, but if I don't, I won't. And you can
mhm,
be the most qualified person in the world, but if you come across as a cold, wet fish, um, you're not going to get it, because in the back of their mind, they're thinking, is this guy a nice guy? Seems to be. Will he fit in our culture? Um, Maybe. Let's keep going. And if you focus on meeting the other person's needs instead of your own, you will relax because you will have embraced, and this is a Damienism, 3 words: be the answer. So when you're interviewing, be the answer to the employer's needs, be the answer to the employer's questions. And if you focus on that, focus on building rapport all the way through, your interviewing will not be as stressive, it will not be as stressful or
Mhm.
stressive. Uh, and in the exchange back and forth, your intuition will have an opportunity to kind of feel everything out. And in addition to interviewing more effectively, you'll be able to walk away with a better idea of what the culture is like.
Mhm. Chelsea?
Oh, there's a lot to follow up on there.
Yeah.
So, number one, number one, I recommend that everyone like just find someone you trust and do a mock interview, because
Mhm.
what I have
Mhm.
found is there's a lot of professionals that don't know how they come off, like you said, Damien, because either you can come off as insecure and you're not giving the employer confidence in your ability, or you can come across as overconfident where you're trying to compensate for something. So you need to get in front of someone who is going to give you that constructive feedback so
Mhm.
that you know what you need to tweak when it comes to your quirks and just how you behave in an interview. So that's number one. Number two is do the work. Mark, like you said, do that research. Know what that industry's problems are or what the employer's problems are. Whenever I used to do interviews, one of the first things I would say is, why do you want to work here? What do you know about us? And you would not believe how many shocked faces that I would get from the
Mhm.
person interviewing, and they wouldn't have an answer. They'd be like, oh, well, I saw this position and I did it before. Oh, okay, so you know nothing about this company and you didn't even bother to do research. You probably don't even know who I am, you know?
Yeah.
So that is number two. Number three, understand what you need from an employer and from a role
Mhm.
so that you can ask those important questions at the end of an interview to make sure that that's even the right role or the right position for you, because it's
Mhm.
not just about you getting the job for the employer. You need to make sure that you are going to like it and be satisfied and happy in that role as well.
Mhm.
Good.
Yep. And I think there's a couple of things to point out too regarding your what you said, Chelsea. One is that if you know the interviewer and have done some research on the interviewer, which I highly recommend doing as even basic
Mhm.
interviewing 101, if you know that somebody's been there for 10 years, it's good to know, or at least show that you care about the company. So it does help to know about the company just to show that you are care and that you're engaged and that you're involved and that you're willing to put some skin in the game. I understand that people want to keep their jobs separate from their emotions, and I get that part because they don't want to put that much into the ante because they've been burned in the past. I get that,
Mhm.
but you've got to care about the work, and one way you're
Mhm.
going to care about the work is care about the workers. So to
Mhm.
be able to show that, you've got to show somewhat that you've done that you've done the right thing. So my friend James goes and he interviews with the National Urban League. I think it was Chicago Urban League.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
getting the interview is kind of tough as it is to be able to get into that building and to be able to talk to the right people. So while he was waiting to be interviewed, he was able to memorize the mission statement. And
Mhm.
he memorized the mission statement. And during the interview, he mentioned the mission statement, rattled it off verbatim. He says, "Well, wait a second. I've been here 10 years and I don't even know the mission statement by now." And he was able to get the job. All that to say is that there's got employers want to know that you really care.
Right.
You know, yeah, you don't have to be sentimental, which is different, but you do have to
Mhm.
show that there is something that you've done to get to know and gain enough intel to show that you're a fit with them. And
Mhm.
that's
Right.
probably going to be one of the only ones that you're going to uh, be able to do that. And one of the challenges I think, and I think we all kind of we all have faced here, is what do we need to find out about the interviewer, and maybe we should run over that tactic a little bit,
Good.
Damien, because you're a master at this. And
Well,
and Chelsea, I've known Damien
Yeah.
for about 8-9 years now, so he really is a master at that, and he has a great story. And we probably have a few minutes for you to tell that, Damien,
which
or
story
one
do
of
you
the
want?
stories. Well, I guess there was one that where you interview where you were turned down from the interview
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
because you knew too much.
Um,
Mhm.
uh, okay, Chelsea. What happened was I was out of work. Uh, I got invited up by Target to interview, and I did my research and knew the people that I was going to interview. Went through the whole 9 yards. 7 interviews in 6.5 hours. Then to the psychiatrist to talk about being dropped on my head when I was a baby. Well, no, not actually. Uh, and got home, and the recruiter was just over the moon. You did a great job. They love you. And I said, well, I love them, et cetera, et cetera. So the bond had been made, right? And
Mhm.
I had the knowledge to institutional knowledge as a buyer that would transfer well. So there was no question that I would get along, no question that I would fit in the organization, no question that I had uh, anything that I would really need to learn. I need to learn their system. Okay, so I come home, I do the right thing, I write thank you letters to everyone, drop it in the mail. 1 week goes by, 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks go by, nothing. And so uh, finally, 5 calls later, the recruiter calls me up, and she's really angry because she was already putting the commission in her pocket. She said, do you know that stunt that you pulled with Target? And I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, when you Federal Expressed the thank you letters. I said, yeah. She said, well, remember you paper clipped all of the thank you notes unfolded and you asked the HR manager to put them into inner office mail? I said, yeah. She said, well, they showed up on everybody's desk and not a single person could figure out how you did it. And I said, okay, so far. She said, no.
Mhm.
She said, you are not going to Target to be the toilet paper and diaper buyer because they figured that the first year you'd be like a kid in a candy factory with all the different procedures and reports and what have you. I said, okay, so she said, you're not going to Target because they felt that you were too creative.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that a remarkable story? I mean, really, those are the things that most hiring managers would want and die for, but because he did
That's
it too well.
mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Right.
He did it too well.
But you know what? So here's the good thing about it. That place wasn't a good fit for you because can you imagine if you would have gotten there and you were just being yourself and being creative and coming up with ideas? It wouldn't have
Oh,
worked out anyway. So you
no.
dodged a bullet.
Yeah. Oh, and it's the best thing that ever happened
Yeah.
because yeah, they were right. I was too creative, and I
Right.
specialize at finding ways around everything. That's just the way that I am. But I guess the moral to the story is, just like you said, is you can do everything right and
Mhm.
get the green light, and you're ready to roll, and it still can go wrong. And in fact, 5 o'clock Club did a study, and it basically said that 8 out of 10 opportunities where you have already interviewed will fall
Mhm.
away without your ability to plan, anticipate, or control, which circles back to what we've all been saying, which is for you to be in the job search arena today requires thought, it requires
Mhm.
time, it requires following the right protocol, and
Mhm.
it requires dedication and commitment, research, and the willingness to understand that it's not all about you, it's all about the employer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're coming to the top of the hour. So definitely, Chelsea, thank you very much for joining us here on the
Thank you.
Modern Jobs Checklist. We love having you. We may have you even back.
Thank you.
Yes,
Uh,
I would
please.
love that.
is there one thing that you'd like people to know about that you have coming up in your professional life?
Oh my goodness. Let's see what is coming up. Last month was my busy month, so this month I've kind of slowed down. But starting in November, I'll be revamping my podcast. November
Oh,
1st. Yes, yes. So if anyone has any, topic ideas or suggestions, send them my way and I will make sure to cover them.
yeah, your podcast is like 10 minutes long, isn't it? Like, I mean, each
Yes,
episode, so
it
it's
is
really
it is
it's
super
all
quick so you
descriptive.
can get what you need to hear right away and get on with your day.
Okay, that would be
Yeah.
interesting to see how you revamp 10 minutes. But
Yes.
yep, you can catch it on all the podcast directories and all that for sure. Damien, anything that we should know that you want the people to know about?
Yeah, this is kind of cool. It's a kind of a breakout for me. I'm working with Lisa Gill at Consumer Reports, and we're working on a story about Medicare because, yes, I went on Medicare and
Hmm.
have just gotten used to the complex process and all the different things that you had to go through. And now we have to go through it all over again for 2022. So it's kind of
Wow.
a fascinating adventure. I'm not quite sure when it is actually going to be published, but that's in the works. And then this is October, so there's a article that's going to be coming out in AARP talking about the challenges and opportunities of going back to work after age 50. So, that's exciting. And then there's also an article that I'm just going to put up that was just done in Upjourney. So lots of good stuff going on.
Nice.
Very cool. I have there are several things I have going on, just waiting for them to be published. I'd rather not talk about them because I got burned one time in mentioning something and it
Mhm.
never published. So I'll just leave those alone. I'll mention it next week when they all appear. But I am going to mention a thing that I do control, which is my podcast. And one of the things I've done this year is I kind of played with the format to where I kind of either from one of the Wednesday shows, Friday shows, I actually put a clip in it, and probably part of this interview session here is going to end up on the podcast in the next show or two, which is going to be towards the end of the month. So I'll let everybody know what's happening. But you've been watching the Modern Job Search Checklist. Again, we stream to LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Annette, thank you very much for being the lone, chat person that was involved in the show. We do appreciate it. Sometimes we have a whole bunch of action, and sometimes the crickets, which is quite fine because people find us more after the
That's right.
broadcast than we do during the broadcast, which is quite fine. We're just here to bring you the best information as possible. Peace in the Valley of Love. Thank you very much. We'll join us next week at Friday at 1 p.m. We have guests coming up. One guest for sure is Sonal Ball, who has a great show called Supercharged Fridays, which comes on, at least here in Chicago, comes on at 7 a.m. Central Time. You can look forward to that. Find her and, enjoy that show. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Annette. We love you too. Talk to you soon. Have a great weekend.